Charles Schulz, the brilliant mind behind Peanuts, spent half a century bringing Charlie Brown, Snoopy, and the rest of the gang to life without missing a single day. Over those 50 years, he became one of the most beloved and recognizable cartoonists in the world, earning millions and inspiring generations. But everything changed in December of 1999 with one devastating phone call. In that moment, Schulz was found in his studio, overwhelmed with emotion, tears streaming down his face as he told his family, "It's over." Behind those simple words was a truth he had been hiding from everyone, a secret that would end Peanuts forever and break the hearts of millions of fans who had no idea what was coming. His hands had begun to tremble uncontrollably, his eyesight was failing, and doctors had given him the kind of diagnosis no artist ever wants to hear. What happened that day marked the tragic final chapter of one of the greatest artistic legacies in history. Charles Monroe Schulz was born on November 26, 1922, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. His father, Carl Schulz, was a hardworking barber of German descent, while his mother, Dina, was a waitress-turned-homemaker with Norwegian roots. Together, they lived a modest life in a small house, always doing their best to make ends meet. Carl ran a tiny barber shop not far from where Dina had worked before giving up her job to take care of their only child. Charles, or Sparky as he was affectionately called, grew up mostly in St. Paul. However, during the Great Depression, when money became unbearably tight, the family was forced to pack up and move to Needles, California, for 2 grueling years. The struggle of those days left a deep imprint on Charles, shaping how he saw the world. Watching his parents battle to keep their family afloat would later become the emotional foundation for many of the quiet, melancholy moments in his comics, the subtle worries and gentle sadness that made Peanuts so human. Just 2 days after he was born, Charles's uncle gave him the nickname Sparky. The name came from a popular comic strip of the 1920s called Barney Google, which featured a beloved horse named Sparkplug. The nickname stuck for life, and it almost seemed destined. After all, even before he could hold a pencil, cartooning was in his blood. Everyone who knew him, even those in his professional career, continued to call him Sparky rather than Charles, as if his life's path had already been set in motion from the very beginning. When the Great Depression struck in late 1929, Charles was just 7 years old. His father's barber shop began losing customers, forcing the family to move multiple times in search of stability. Life felt uncertain and frightening. When they finally relocated to Needles, California, the strange, desolate environment made young Charles feel even more isolated. He later described those years as weird and awful, and that haunting sense of loss and insecurity never truly left him. He vividly remembered times when there was barely enough food to eat, moments of desperation that later resurfaced in his storytelling, like when Charlie Brown worried his family might starve if his father lost his job. Schulz didn't just write about fear and struggle, he wrote from experience. During those early years, Charles had a dog named Spike, a scrappy black and white hunting dog with a strange appetite for nails, tacks, rubber, and even razor blades, yet somehow, he always seemed fine. In 1937, when Charles was just 14, he decided to draw a portrait of Spike and send it to Ripley's Believe It or Not. To his amazement, the drawing was published on February 22 of that year, marking the very first time his artwork appeared in print. That small success meant everything to him. He was overjoyed. To him, Spike was more than just a pet, he was a companion who could ring doorbells and even understand more than 50 words. But when Charles was only 10 years old, Spike was tragically hit by a car and killed. That loss devastated him, leaving a wound that never quite healed. Years later, that same love and pain would find new life in the form of Snoopy, the imaginative and loyal beagle loved around the world. Though the Schulz family often struggled to make ends meet, Charles's mother never stopped encouraging his artistic dreams. She would buy him pencils, paper, and supplies even when they could barely afford groceries. His father, on the other hand, didn't believe that drawing could ever lead to a stable career. To Carl, art seemed frivolous, something for idle dreamers rather than hardworking men. This difference in belief caused tension in the household. Carl wanted his son to follow in his footsteps as a barber, while Dina stood firmly by Charles's side, urging him to chase his creative passion. That support meant everything to him, but tragedy struck too soon. In 1943, Dina passed away from cervical cancer at just 48 years old. Her death shattered him. At the same time, Charles was drafted into the U.S. Army, forced to leave for war while still grieving the loss of the person who had believed in him most. She never got to see him succeed, but every comic strip he ever drew carried a piece of her love within it. Charles began his education at Richard Gordon Elementary School in St. Paul when he was 6 years old. He was exceptionally bright, so much so that teachers advanced him 2 grades ahead. But being smaller and younger than his classmates made life miserable. He was shy, quiet, and constantly bullied. He never quite fit in, and those painful feelings of isolation became the emotional core of Peanuts. Charlie Brown's awkwardness, insecurity, and longing to belong were reflections of the boy Charles once was. When Ripley's Believe It or Not published his Spike drawing in 1937, it should have been a triumphant moment. Instead, his classmates mocked him. They said his drawing was stupid, and even his teachers didn't seem to care. It was a lesson he would carry for life. Success doesn't always bring acceptance, sometimes it only invites more rejection. High school offered little relief. Charles struggled academically, failing Latin, English, algebra, and even scoring a 0 in physics. He tried to contribute his artwork to the school yearbook, but every single submission was turned down. The rejection broke his heart. He couldn't understand why his work was never good enough. That sting of failure stayed with him for decades, so much so that at age 53, he publicly shared his old report card just to prove that he wasn't as unintelligent as people had once believed. In 1938, when Charles was still a teenager, his mother was diagnosed with cervical cancer. Over the next 5 years, her condition gradually worsened. The family initially kept the seriousness of her illness from him, but he saw her pain daily. Morphine barely dulled her suffering, and he often heard her crying through the night. To lift her spirits, Charles began drawing comics, his only way to offer comfort. The family moved into an apartment above Carl's barber shop so that his father could check on Dina more easily. Charles witnessed her decline day by day, and when she passed away on February 28, 1943, just 3 days before he was sent off to war, her final expression burned itself into his memory forever. At 17, in 1940, Charles enrolled in a correspondence art course from the art instruction schools. The tuition cost $170, a staggering sum at the time, several months of his father's wages, but Carl paid it anyway, even as Dina's medical bills mounted. Charles studied everything he could: figure drawing, lettering, shading, and more. When the power went out, he worked by candlelight, reusing paper and pencils until they nearly disintegrated. To help pay for future lessons, he later took a job grading other students' art for the same school. Those years taught him a powerful lesson, that pursuing a dream demands sacrifice, discipline, and faith. In February 1943, Charles was drafted into the U.S. Army. He served as a staff sergeant in the 20th Armored Division, leading a .50 caliber machine gun squad through Europe during World War II. His unit landed in France on February 19, 1945, and they marched through war zones for over 1,400 miles. On April 30, 1945, they reached Dachau concentration camp, just 1 day after its liberation. Charles never forgot the haunting sight of survivors wandering near their trucks. The horror of that moment etched itself into his mind forever. Despite commanding a gun squad, he only fired once, and even then, he forgot to load his weapon. The German soldier surrendered anyway. For his bravery and service, Charles was awarded the Combat Infantryman Badge, one of the honors he cherished most. Before shipping out, Charles had been granted a short leave from Fort Snelling to visit his mother one final time. She was gravely ill, and during their last conversation, he told her, "We'll probably get a dog when I come back." That simple promise lived in his heart forever. Snoopy, the cheerful and imaginative dog who became a global icon, was born from that vow, a tribute to the mother and companion he never got to share his success with. When the war ended in late 1945 and Charles finally returned home, he was no longer the same person. Haunted by grief and the trauma of what he had seen, he moved back into the small apartment above his father's barber shop. There were moments when despair nearly consumed him, and he considered giving up entirely. But instead of breaking, he turned to the one thing that had always given him peace: drawing. In July 1946, he began working again for art instruction schools, grading student drawings for a modest wage. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work, and it introduced him to people who would later inspire some of the most memorable characters in Peanuts. One of those people was a red-haired accountant named Donna Mae Johnson. In 1947, before his career truly took off, Charles fell deeply in love with Donna. They shared lunches, conversations, and dreams about the future. He believed she was the one. By 1950, just before Peanuts officially debuted, Charles proposed, but Donna turned him down. She was already engaged to another man, Al Wold, someone she had known for years. The rejection devastated him. He later described it as the most painful heartbreak of his life. Watching the woman he loved marry someone else crushed him emotionally, and that sorrow never fully went away. Instead, it transformed into art, the eternal story of Charlie Brown and the little red-haired girl who would never love him back. Charles Schulz's first professional comic strip was titled Lil' Folks. It premiered on June 8, 1947, in the Minneapolis Tribune and later appeared in the St. Paul Pioneer Press. For each published strip, he earned a mere $10. The comic continued for nearly 3 years, running until January 22, 1950. Eventually, however, Charles's ambitions clashed with his editor's limitations. Schulz asked that Lil' Folks be moved from the women's section of the paper to the main comics page, where the real comic artists were featured, and he requested a small raise. The editor refused both requests. After years of hard work and dedication, Schulz was forced to quit. At just 24 years old, he found himself back in that small apartment above his father's shop, unsure of what the future held, but still holding on to his dream of making the world smile through his drawings.